Duck through the tiny driver's hatch, barely 45 centimeters wide, drop onto a seat so narrow your hips ache after 10 minutes, and try not to bang your head on the transmission tunnel that rises like a steel coffin lid between you and the bow gunner. Twist sideways to let the loader squeeze past, his knees will knock the backs of yours every time the tank lurches. Above you the turret basket is a cage of pipes, hydraulic lines, and the massive recoil cradle of the 7.5 cm KWK-42. There is no headroom, the commander stands bent forward, spine curved like a question mark, peering through his cupola periscope that gives him roughly the same field of view as a postage stamp. The gunner is wedged so tightly against the telescope that he has to breathe in rhythm with the recoil or risk a cracked rib. The air is thick with diesel fumes, hot oil, and the sharp tang of hydraulic fluid. The temperature inside a moving Panther in summer routinely exceeded 50 degrees Celsius, in winter the steel sucked every degree of warmth from your body. Welcome to what was supposed to be the finest tank of the Second World War. On paper it was unbeatable. Frontal glacis, 80 mm at 55 degrees 139 to 142 mm effective thickness. Turret front, 100 to 110 mm. Side armor, 40 to 50 mm at clever angles. The KWK-42L/70 fired a 6.8 kg PZGR 39/42 APCBC round at 935 meters per second, enough to punch through a Sherman's front turret at 2,500 meters and still have energy to spare. Top speed on roads was originally 55 km per hour, after the engine was deliberately detuned to save where it was still a respectable 46 km per hour. Ground pressure of only 0.74 kg per square centimeter, better than the T-34. Zeiss optics that let a trained gunner hit a 2 by 2 meter target at 1,500 meters first shot, 9 times out of 10. To a generation raised on Wochenschau newsreels of Panthers gliding across the steppe crushing T-34s like toys, this was the future of armored warfare. Reality arrived with the first combat reports. Kursk, July 1943, baptism by fire and breakdown. Panzerregiment Großdeutschland and SS Panzerregiment II received the first 200 Panthers in May-June 1943. Many caught fire on the rail cars before even reaching the front. Of the 196 that finally detrained, only 40 were still combat-ready by the evening of July 5. The first day of Citadel. The rest? 23 destroyed by Soviet fire or mines, 87 broken down with engine or transmission trouble, 46 under short or long-term repair. The official after-action report listed teething troubles, a phrase that would haunt the Panther program for the rest of its life. The fatal drive that never was fixed. Everyone who has ever looked closely at the Panther knows the final drive catastrophe, but few understand just how fundamental it was. The original Daimler-Benz and MAN designs, submitted in 1942, were for a 30-35-ton vehicle. Hitler demanded the 8.8 cm gun be considered, then settled for the long 7.5 cm, but he also kept piling on armor. By the time the first production OSF-D rolled out in January 1943, the tank weighed 44.8 tons, fully 10 tons over design spec. The final drive housing, already a complex double-spur gear arrangement chosen because Germany had lost most of its precision gear cutting machines to bombing, was never strengthened. The housing flexed under load. The gears inside bound, overheated, and shattered. Average life before catastrophic failure, 1943 to 44, 150 to 200 kilometers, late 1944, after minor hardening improvements 300 to 500 kilometers, French post-war testing, 1947 still only 150 kilometers under normal peacetime conditions. To put that in perspective, a Panther leaving the factory in Berlin for the Eastern Front, roughly 200 kilometers, had to have its final drive replaced at least twice before it ever saw combat, if spares and trained mechanics were even available, which they usually weren't. Heinz Guderian wrote in June 1944, the lifespan of the Panther's engine is significantly higher than that of its final drives. An urgent solution is required. No solution ever came. The housing would have needed complete redesign and new forging dies, impossible under Allied air bombardment. The Maybach that ate itself, the HL-230P30 sounded impressive, 23 liters, 700 horsepower at 3,000 revolutions per minute, but it was a rushed design with chronic weaknesses, fuel pump drive shafts sheared, cylinder head gaskets blew. Oil pumps failed, starving bearings, exhaust manifolds glowed cherry red and ignited oil leaks. At Kursk some Panthers burst into flames from fuel leaks before firing a shot. By November 1943 the engine was permanently detuned to 2,500 revolutions per minute and 580 horsepower just to keep it alive. Even then, average overhaul life was 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers, still better than the final drive, but still pathetic compared to the Ford GAA in late Sherman's, 4,000 to 6,000 kilometers between overhauls, or the Soviet V-2 diesel, sometimes 8,000 kilometers. Turret traverse, beautiful when it worked, useless when it didn't. Early Panthers used a single-speed hydraulic traverse powered directly by the main engine. Full 360 degrees rotation took roughly 60 seconds in high gear at 2,500 revolutions per minute, and up to 4 minutes if the engine was idling. Later G models introduced a 2-speed system, 17 to 18 seconds in high gear, still 60 seconds in low. If the engine died, the turret froze solid. Sherman crews enjoyed a Westinghouse electric traverse that spun the turret in 15 seconds flat, engine on or off, using a tiny auxiliary generator. In combat that difference was life or death. Tracks, mud, and the Russian winter, the famous interleaved road wheels gave a superbly smooth ride and distributed weight beautifully, on paper. In reality they turned the Panther into a 45-ton snowplow. Mud, snow, and ice packed between the overlapping wheels and froze solid overnight. Crews spent hours with crowbars and blowtorches trying to free their own tank while Shermans with simple, widely spaced bogies just drove away laughing. Crew ergonomics, designed by sadists, driver and bow gunner/radio operator sat almost back-to-back with no way to communicate except by shouting or kicking. Loader had to lift 15 kilograms shells over the breach in a space so cramped he often stood on one leg. Ammunition stowage was scattered everywhere, floor, walls, sponsons, no ready. Racks within easy reach, escape. Almost impossible under fire. The side hatches were tiny, the turret hatches blocked by the gun when traversed forward. Sherman crews had logical ready racks. A logical layout, and multiple large hatches, including a belly escape hatch. When a Sherman brewed up, crews often lived. When a Panther brewed up, the result was usually 5 charred corpses, captured Panthers, a brief, glorious, doomed career. British Cuckoo, Coldstream Guards, 1944-45 fought brilliantly until final drive failed. Canadian Deserter, Italy, 1944 used in several assaults, then abandoned when parts ran out. Polish Home Army, Warsaw. August 1944 2 Panthers helped liberate Gasioka Camp, freeing 348 prisoners, both immobilized days later. French 503e Regiment de Charge de Combat, 1946-50 the most thorough operational test of any Panther unit. Their 1947 report is devastating: 150 kilometers final drives, constant engine fires, impossible field maintenance, and the conclusion that the Panther is an excellent tank for short demonstrations, entirely unsuitable for sustained campaign use. ### British post-war trials. The final humiliation. In 1946-47 the British forced German workers at the Mann plant in Hanover to complete 9 unfinished Panthers for trials. Standard British acceptance tests, cross-country runs, hill climbs, reliability marches, were attempted. The trials were abandoned when the last functioning Panther shredded its transmission on a moderate incline. The official report concluded, very little information of value was obtained owing to the general mechanical unreliability of the Panther and Jag Panther tanks. Production versus reality. Total Panther production, 5,984 to 6,008, authoritative sources converge on this, not the 9,000 often quoted. Peak monthly output, 380, July 1944. Peak frontline strength, 200, September 1944. Operational readiness by March 1945, 49%. Sherman production, 49,324. American divisions routinely kept 70 to 90% readiness even after heavy combat because new tanks rolled off ships faster than they could be knocked out, the numbers that ended the myth. Normandy Campaign, June, August 1944. Roughly 2,200 Panthers committed. Over 50% of abandoned vehicles examined by Allied technical intelligence teams showed no combat damage, purely mechanical failure or lack of fuel/spares. Ardennes Offensive, December 1944. Many Panther battalions started with full tanks and ended on foot after 80 to 120 kilometers because final drives exploded or fuel ran dry. Eastern Front, January-April 1945, some units reported 70 to 80% mechanical losses before contacting the enemy. Why the Sherman won? It wasn't even close when you look at the whole system. 1. Reliability. Sherman final drives routinely lasted 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers. 2. Maintainability. Power pack, engine transmission, could be swapped in 8 to 10 hours by a trained crew with a crane. 3. Logistics, ran on plentiful 80-octane gasoline, not scarce synthetic fuel. 4. Production, built by 11 different manufacturers using interchangeable parts. 5. Crew comfort. Survivability, wet storage ammo reduced brew-ups by 85%, multiple large hatches, logical layout. 6. Doctrine, Shermans rarely fought Panthers alone, tank destroyers, M10, M18, M36, artillery, and Jabos handled the cats while Shermans exploited breakthroughs. 7. Sustainability, the U.S. replaced 580% of its Sherman strength in Europe and still had tanks left over. The verdict of history, the Panther was a spectacular sprint car forced to run a 24-hour endurance race with no pit crew, no spare parts, and a drivetrain made of glass. It could win any single lap, brilliantly, but it could not finish the season. The Sherman was a reliable family sedan that could be repaired in any garage, refueled at any gas station, and driven by a teenager after a few weeks' training. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. In May 1945, American Shermans rolled into Berlin, Pilsen, and the Austrian Alps. The last Panther left the factory in March 1945, many were abandoned in the factory yard for lack of fuel to move them to the front. Israeli M51 Shermans with 105mm guns were still killing T-62s in 1973, 28 years after the Panther became museum pieces. That is the real difference between a tank that looked perfect on paper and a tank that actually won the war. The Panther was the most beautiful failure in armored history. The Sherman was the ugliest success, and beauty lost.